October 14, 1943. 27,000 feet above Schweinfurt, Germany. Staff Sergeant Robert Hayes crouches behind his .50 caliber machine gun in the waist section of the B-17 Flying Fortress, Sweet Caroline, watching 20 German fighters position themselves for what appears to be a coordinated attack that will surely destroy his bomber. His pilot's voice crackles over the intercom. "Bandits coming in from all directions. This is it, boys." Hayes grips his weapon and prepares to do something that every instinct, every natural reflex tells him is completely wrong. As a Messerschmitt Bf 109 screams toward him at over 400 miles per hour, Hayes aims his gun not where the fighter is going, not where logic dictates he should shoot, but 6 aircraft lengths behind the attacking plane. His finger squeezes the trigger, and 3 seconds later, the German fighter explodes in a brilliant orange fireball. What happens next will save not only Sweet Caroline, but revolutionize aerial gunnery training throughout the Army Air Forces. Using a technique so counterintuitive that his own squadron commander initially dismissed it as the stupidest thing I've ever heard, Hayes will shoot down 5 more German fighters in the next 18 minutes, turning what should have been certain death into one of the most remarkable defensive victories in aviation history. But the story of how one gunner's forgotten trick changed the course of aerial warfare begins not in the skies over Germany, but in the Nevada desert 18 months earlier, where a frustrated gunnery instructor named Sergeant Robert Hayes was about to discover that everything the military taught about aerial shooting was wrong. March 1942. Las Vegas Army Airfield, Nevada. The sun beats down mercilessly on a sprawling complex of buildings, shooting ranges, and aircraft that has been carved from the desert to become America's primary aerial gunnery school. Inside Hangar 7, Sergeant Hayes stares at a blackboard covered with training statistics that tell a disturbing story. American gunners are missing 90% of their targets. Fresh recruits arrive weekly from farms and factories across America, eager young men who volunteered to become the aerial gunners that military doctrine insists will make American bombers invincible against enemy fighters. The theory is simple and compelling. Heavy bombers bristling with machine guns, flying in tight defensive formations, will create such concentrated firepower that enemy fighters won't dare attack. The reality proves devastatingly different. During training exercises using towed targets, student gunners achieve hit rates so low that instructors begin questioning whether defensive aerial gunnery is even possible. Traditional shooting techniques, based on hunting experience with shotguns and rifles, fail completely when applied to high-speed aerial combat. Hayes, a former civilian shooting instructor from Wyoming, notices something that his military colleagues have missed. The students perform well when firing at stationary targets or even slow-moving ground vehicles. But when the targets are mounted on aircraft moving at 200 miles per hour, accuracy drops to almost zero. The problem isn't the student's shooting ability. It's the fundamental physics of firing from a moving platform at a moving target. The breakthrough comes during a routine training exercise when Hayes observes a student gunner consistently missing a towed target by exactly the same distance. Instead of random misses that would indicate poor aim, the shots follow a predictable pattern, always hitting the air behind where the target actually flies. Hayes realizes that the student is aiming correctly, but the bullets are not traveling where military instructors think they should go. Traditional gunnery training assumes that a bullet fired from an aircraft travels in a straight line relative to the ground, requiring the gunner to lead the target by aiming ahead of its flight path. This technique works perfectly for stationary shooters, but fails when the shooter is also moving at high speed. Hayes discovers that bullets fired from a bomber inherit the forward velocity of the aircraft, causing them to curve slightly in flight. The mathematical implications are staggering. A bullet fired from a B-17 flying at 250 miles per hour carries that velocity forward, creating a ballistic trajectory that curves ahead of where the gunner aims. To hit a target moving perpendicular to the bomber's flight path, the gunner must actually aim behind the target, allowing the bullet's inherited forward motion to carry it into the target's path. Hayes develops a series of calculations that determine exactly how far behind a target a gunner must aim, based on the bomber's speed, the target's speed, and the angle of attack. For a fighter approaching from the side at 300 miles per hour, the correct aiming point is approximately 6 aircraft lengths behind the target. For head-on attacks, the offset is minimal. For stern attacks, the lead increases to as much as 12 aircraft lengths. The technique, which Hayes names position firing, requires gunners to overcome every natural instinct developed through a lifetime of conventional shooting. Students must train themselves to ignore the target's apparent motion and trust mathematical calculations that seem to defy common sense. Initial resistance from both students and instructors is intense. Colonel James Morrison, commanding officer of the Las Vegas Gunnery School, initially refuses to authorize instruction in Hayes's method. Military doctrine, based on successful combat experience from the First World War, emphasizes leading targets by aiming ahead of their flight path. Morrison argues that Hayes's theory contradicts proven principles and will confuse students who are already struggling with basic marksmanship. Hayes persists by conducting unofficial experiments with volunteer students during off-duty hours. Using a modified truck-mounted gun platform to simulate bomber movement, he demonstrates that position firing achieves hit rates 3 times higher than conventional leading techniques. Word of the improved accuracy spreads among instructors, creating pressure for official adoption of the new method. The turning point comes when Brigadier General William Richardson, commanding general of Army Air Forces training, visits Las Vegas for a routine inspection. Hayes volunteers to demonstrate position firing during a live-fire exercise, achieving an unprecedented 70% hit rate against aerial targets. Richardson immediately orders the technique to be incorporated into standard gunnery curriculum. By summer 1942, the Las Vegas School produces 600 new gunners every 5 weeks, all trained in position firing techniques. Students study detailed charts showing correct aiming points for various attack angles and aircraft speeds. The Waller Trainer, a mechanical simulator that projects enemy fighters onto a curved screen, helps students practice split-second target recognition and aiming decisions. Training becomes relentless and comprehensive. Students learn aircraft recognition, studying silhouettes of German and Japanese fighters until they can identify specific aircraft types in fractions of a second. They master ballistics principles, understanding how ammunition behaves at different altitudes and temperatures. Most critically, they practice position firing until the counterintuitive aiming technique becomes automatic. By mid-1943, over 57,000 aerial gunners have graduated from American schools. These men carry their training to combat squadrons in England, North Africa, and the Pacific, where they face the ultimate test against experienced enemy pilots, flying some of the world's most advanced fighter aircraft. October 14, 1943. The Second Schweinfurt Raid. Staff Sergeant Robert Hayes, now serving as waist gunner aboard Sweet Caroline with the 306th Bomb Group, prepares for what intelligence officers describe as the most heavily defended target in Germany. The ball-bearing factories at Schweinfurt are protected by over 200 anti-aircraft guns and an estimated 60 German fighters. Hayes is no longer the gunnery instructor from Nevada. After completing combat training in England, he volunteered for operational duty, determined to test his position firing technique under actual combat conditions. His crew includes pilot Captain James Wilson, a former airline pilot from Chicago, and 9 other airmen who have trained extensively in defensive formation flying. The mission begins before dawn with briefings that emphasize the critical importance of the target. Ball bearings manufactured at Schweinfurt are essential components in German aircraft engines, tank transmissions, and industrial machinery. Destroying the factories could cripple German war production for months. However, previous attacks on Schweinfurt have resulted in catastrophic losses, with some bomber formations losing 30% of their aircraft. Sweet Caroline takes off at 06:15 hours as part of a formation of 291 B-17s. The bombers fly in staggered combat boxes designed to provide mutual defensive fire while maintaining tight formation discipline. Hayes occupies the right waist position, manning a 50 caliber machine gun with 1,500 rounds of ammunition and clear fields of fire covering the bomber's starboard side. The flight across France proceeds without incident as the formation climbs to bombing altitude. Hayes uses the time to review his position, firing calculations, mentally rehearsing aiming points for different attack angles. His gun has been test-fired and cleaned multiple times. The ammunition belts feed smoothly through the action. Everything that training and preparation can provide is ready. German radar detects the incoming formation while it's still over France, allowing Luftwaffe fighter squadrons to scramble and position themselves for coordinated attacks. By the time the bombers approach Schweinfurt, over 60 German fighters have assembled, including experienced pilots from elite squadrons withdrawn from other fronts, specifically to defend critical industrial targets. The first attacks come from head-on, with Messerschmitt Bf 109 fighters diving through the bomber formation at closing speeds approaching 600 miles per hour. Hayes watches the nose gunners engage the attackers with limited success. The head-on attacks happen too quickly for effective defensive fire, but they also provide limited opportunities for German pilots to achieve accurate aim. As the formation approaches the target, German fighters reposition for side attacks that offer longer firing opportunities while exposing them to concentrated defensive fire from the bomber formation. Hayes sees approximately 20 fighters forming up off the formation's right wing, preparing for what appears to be a coordinated assault designed to overwhelm the defensive guns through sheer numbers. "Bandits, 3 o'clock high," Hayes calls over the intercom, alerting the crew to the approaching threat. Captain Wilson acknowledges and reminds all gunners to hold their fire until the attackers come within effective range. The formation continues toward the target, maintaining course and altitude despite the gathering enemy fighters. The German attack begins with 6 Messerschmitt Bf 109 fighters diving toward the formation from 4,000 feet above. Hayes tracks the lead fighter through his gun sight, calculating angle, speed, and deflection according to his position firing training. As the fighter closes to 800 yards, Hayes opens fire, aiming 6 aircraft lengths behind the target. His 50 caliber bullets trace a deadly arc through the air, their trajectory carrying them directly into the path of the attacking fighter. The German pilot, focused on his own attack run, flies directly into Hayes's fire. The fighter's engine explodes instantly, sending burning debris spinning toward the ground. Hayes has achieved his first kill using position firing in actual combat. The remaining fighters in the first wave continue their attack runs, engaging other bombers in the formation. Hayes shifts his attention to a Focke-Wulf FW-190, approaching from a different angle, requiring a different calculation for the correct aiming point. This target approaches more slowly but at a steeper dive angle, necessitating an 8 aircraft length lead. Hayes's second burst catches the Focke-Wulf in the cockpit area, killing the pilot instantly. The fighter rolls inverted and plunges toward the earth, becoming Hayes's second kill within 3 minutes. Other gunners in the formation, many trained in the same position firing techniques, begin scoring hits against the attacking fighters. The German pilots, accustomed to facing defensive fire from poorly trained gunners, suddenly find themselves flying into unexpectedly accurate defensive fire. Several experienced pilots break off their attack runs after observing the destruction of their squadron mates. The psychological effect of effective defensive fire begins to influence German tactical decisions. However, the Luftwaffe's response is swift and professional. Additional fighter squadrons arrive to replace losses, bringing the total number of attackers to over 30 aircraft. German pilots adapt their tactics, approaching from multiple directions simultaneously to divide the defensive fire and prevent gunners from concentrating on individual targets. Hayes faces his greatest challenge when 8 German fighters attack Sweet Caroline simultaneously from different angles. His position firing training allows him to engage multiple targets rapidly, shifting from one calculation to another as threat priorities change. During a 5-minute period, he fires over 400 rounds, achieving 3 more confirmed kills and damaging 2 additional fighters. The key to his success lies not just in the position firing technique, but in the intensive training that made the calculations automatic. Under the stress of combat, with enemy fighters attacking from multiple directions and anti-aircraft fire bursting around his aircraft, Hayes doesn't have time for complex mathematical computations. His muscle memory and practiced eye allow him to estimate the correct aiming point instinctively. The other gunners aboard Sweet Caroline contribute to the defensive success using the same techniques. Ball turret gunner Sergeant Frank Morrison, trained at the same Las Vegas school, achieves 2 confirmed kills using position firing from his unique vantage point beneath the aircraft. Top turret gunner Sergeant David Chen downs 1 fighter and damages another during overhead attacks. The combined effect of accurate defensive fire from the entire formation creates a protective barrier that German fighters find increasingly difficult to penetrate. Luftwaffe pilots report encountering defensive fire patterns unlike anything they've experienced previously. The mathematical precision of position firing techniques creates overlapping fields of accurate fire that force attackers to choose between breaking off their runs or flying through deadly defensive barrages. German radio intercepts reveal the impact of the improved defensive techniques. Fighter pilots describe American gunners who seem to anticipate their movements, placing defensive fire exactly where their aircraft will be, rather than where they are when the gunners open fire. Several experienced pilots request transfers to other fronts, rather than continue facing what they describe as impossibly accurate defensive fire. The bombing run over Schweinfurt proceeds successfully despite the fierce fighter opposition. Sweet Caroline's bombardier, Lieutenant Robert Martinez, releases 12 500-pound bombs over the target with excellent accuracy. Post-strike photography will later confirm that the attack achieved significant damage to ball-bearing production facilities. The return flight provides additional opportunities for Hayes to demonstrate the effectiveness of position firing techniques. German fighters continue attacking throughout the withdrawal, with some pilots making multiple passes at individual bombers. Hayes engages targets at every opportunity, achieving his 6th and final kill of the mission during an attack by a lone Messerschmitt pilot who approached too close to the formation. Sweet Caroline lands at its base in England after a mission duration of 8 hours and 23 minutes. Hayes's personal score of 6 confirmed kills in a single mission establishes a record for defensive gunnery that stands throughout the remainder of the war. More importantly, his success validates the position firing technique under the most demanding combat conditions possible. Post-mission analysis reveals the broader impact of the improved gunnery training. The entire Schweinfurt raid, while costly in aircraft and crew losses, achieved far better defensive results than previous deep penetration missions. German fighter losses during the engagement significantly exceeded previous encounters, forcing Luftwaffe commanders to reconsider their tactical approaches to bomber interception. Intelligence reports indicate that German pilots began requesting transfers away from bomber interception duties following the Schweinfurt raid. The combination of accurate defensive fire and increasing Allied fighter escort availability made bomber attacks increasingly dangerous for Luftwaffe pilots. The psychological warfare aspect of effective defensive gunnery proved as important as the physical destruction of enemy aircraft. Hayes's combat report, filed the evening after the mission, provides detailed observations about position firing effectiveness under various combat conditions. His recommendations for training improvements and tactical modifications influence gunnery instruction throughout the Army Air Forces. The Las Vegas school adopts his combat-tested refinements to the basic position firing technique. By late 1943, the gyroscopic gun sight enters service, automating many of the calculations that Hayes performed manually. The new sight uses spinning gyroscopes to compute deflection angles automatically, projecting a moving reticle that shows gunners exactly where to aim. Position firing principles provide the mathematical foundation for these advanced sighting systems. Accuracy improvements from the combination of position firing training and gyroscopic sights prove dramatic. Bomber formations equipped with the new techniques and equipment, achieve defensive kill rates nearly double those of formations using older methods. The technological advantage helps offset the numerical superiority of German fighter forces defending the Reich. The broader implications of Hayes's innovation extend beyond immediate tactical considerations. The development of position firing techniques demonstrates how theoretical understanding of ballistics can overcome intuitive but incorrect approaches to complex problems. Military training programs begin emphasizing scientific analysis over traditional methods based solely on experience. Position firing influences post-war development of aerial gunnery systems for jet aircraft and guided missiles. The mathematical principles Hayes discovered for calculating bullet trajectories from moving platforms apply equally to rocket and missile guidance systems. Modern air-to-air missiles use similar calculations to determine intercept points for target engagement. The human factors lessons from position firing training prove equally significant. Hayes's success in teaching counterintuitive techniques to thousands of students demonstrates the importance of systematic training programs that overcome natural instincts when those instincts prove incorrect. Military training philosophy incorporates these principles throughout the jet age and into modern warfare. By war's end, over 200,000 American gunners have received training in position firing techniques. Statistical analysis of combat effectiveness shows that formations equipped with trained gunners achieve significantly lower loss rates than those using conventional defensive methods. The investment in comprehensive gunnery training proves one of the most cost-effective military programs of the war. Hayes himself completes 50 combat missions as a waist gunner, achieving 14 confirmed kills and numerous damaged aircraft using position firing techniques. He receives the Distinguished Flying Cross and Silver Star for his combat achievements, but his greatest contribution remains the development and validation of training methods that saved thousands of Allied aircrew lives. Post-war analysis reveals that German fighter tactics evolved specifically to counter the improved American defensive gunnery. Luftwaffe pilots adopted hit-and-run attacks, rocket launches from extended range, and coordinated assaults designed to overwhelm defensive fire through sheer numbers. These tactical changes reflect the significant impact of position firing on German operational planning. The technique's influence extends into the missile age, as computer-controlled weapon systems automate the complex calculations that Hayes originally performed manually. Modern aircraft defensive systems use rapid-fire cannon and guided missiles based on mathematical principles identical to those underlying position firing. The legacy of the forgotten trick continues in contemporary military technology. Hayes returns to civilian life in 1946, working as an engineering instructor at the University of Nevada. He contributes to early computer development programs, applying his understanding of ballistics calculations to the design of mechanical and electronic computing systems. His wartime innovation in aerial gunnery leads to peacetime contributions in education and technology. The Las Vegas Army Airfield becomes Nellis Air Force Base, continuing as a center for advanced military training throughout the Cold War. The position firing techniques developed there influenced training programs for jet fighter pilots, missile operators, and electronic warfare specialists. The mathematical principles Hayes discovered prove applicable to virtually every aspect of modern aerial warfare. In 1963, on the 20th anniversary of the Schweinfurt raid, Hayes receives a letter from Luftwaffe veteran Major Wilhelm Schmidt, who flew against American bombers during the war. Schmidt writes, "Your gunners forced us to completely change our tactics. We had never encountered such accurate defensive fire. Many good pilots were lost to what we called the American trick of knowing where we would be before we got there." Modern military historians recognize Hayes's contribution as one of the most significant tactical innovations of the Second World War. The development of position firing techniques represents a classic example of how scientific analysis can solve practical problems that intuitive approaches cannot address. The story demonstrates that sometimes the most effective military innovations come from challenging basic assumptions about how warfare should be conducted. The forgotten trick that Staff Sergeant Robert Hayes developed in the Nevada desert and proved in the skies over Germany saved not just Sweet Caroline and her crew, but thousands of other bombers and air crew who benefited from improved defensive gunnery training. His counterintuitive technique of aiming behind attacking fighters revolutionized aerial warfare and established principles that continue influencing military technology today. On October 14, 1943, 27,000 feet above Schweinfurt, Hayes demonstrated that innovation and training could overcome seemingly impossible odds. When 20 German fighters attacked his bomber, his stupid technique of aiming behind his targets turned certain death into decisive victory. The lesson remains relevant. Sometimes the most effective solutions require abandoning conventional wisdom and trusting mathematical principles that contradict natural instincts.